John's actually, his parents are originally from Taiwan, and he was born in New York City, raised in Chicago, got his degree, finance degree from University of South Florida, and went on to get a law degree from Georgetown. And he served as an attorney, a tax attorney, a few years. He was the president of Taiwanese American Lawyer Association in Los Angeles. And then he moved on to join the politics arena and got his first elected job as a Board of Equalization in Los Angeles, and then moved all the way up. He became a chairman of the Board of Equalization and became a controller, two-term controller. And this is his second term as a treasurer of California. He did a lot of great job to help California manage the finance. Some of the examples that he took us out from the 2008 extremely bad recession, and now we have a lot of surplus. And he also modified a lot of tax codes and educate a lot of people, particularly low-income people, middle class, so that they could benefit for understanding the tax law to maximize their welfare. And one of the examples is that he fought with then governor, Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. In 2008, he issued an executive order trying to stop the payment from California government to the California federal worker to cut the deficit. But John said, no, over my dead body. So he took Arnold Schwarzenegger to the court, all the way to Supreme Court. He won the case. So he's a person that really work for you, work for the middle class, and not just that. He's a community leader. I worked with him for 13 years when I was in San Diego. I was the president for many associations and also chairman of Asia Business Association board. And there we work very closely to empower Taiwanese American and Asian American community in general. And John is our most reliable and trustable airline. And every time we ask him to be our keynote speaker, and that he had to draw 1.5 hours, 3 hours both ways, but he never said no. And he also put together, in order to encourage the second generation to get involved in politics, he worked with the Taiwanese American Citizens League to set up an intern program. And that helped connect all these second generation Taiwanese American to federal, local, congressmen, city, and all these leaders, so that they got to know the political system and to learn from there. Eventually, when they decided to get into that role, they have some training. I've been went to a couple of those events that the intern graduate and present their work. So John is our most trustable ally. We are very proud of him. He's moving all the way up. And in Southern California, almost every Taiwanese American association supported him since day one. Here in Northern California, unfortunately, we don't know him very much. So that's why the TAF-NC invited him to start to build a relationship with us and with our Taco San Francisco office, so he could help us a lot more in the political arena. And we could also support him to get him to become the first Taiwanese American governor ever in California's history. Let's ask David Chiu to say a couple words, and we'll really give the microphone to John.
So a few minutes ago, as I just told John, I told you about the excitement that we have in the Asian American community and those of us who are from the Taiwanese American community about his candidacy. But let me say this, being in politics is very, very difficult. John will tell you, and I will tell you, that my parents, who many of you know, didn't think it was a smart idea for us to enter into politics. Because when I was 38, thinking about my first office, there were very few folks who looked like us who ran for office. It is a tough business. But this man, John Cheung, is someone who statewide, those of us who are younger Asian American elected officials, we have looked up to him for many years. He has pioneered the way. And you've heard a little bit about his background as a lawyer, as someone who understands finance, as someone who served on the Board of Equalization, and as our controller, and as our treasurer. But I will tell you, in Sacramento, in San Francisco, around the state of California, John is someone who's not just an Asian face, but who has exemplified what it means to be an outstanding public official, who exemplifies what competence is, who exemplifies what it means to establish trust and trustworthiness in government. And John happens to be a son of Taiwanese immigrants. And I know in the next year and a half, our diverse communities around the state are going to rally behind him. I've talked to African Americans and Latinos and Asians who are not of Taiwanese or Chinese background who are excited about John. But our community here, this is his family. And he knows that this is where he came from, and he is someone who knows you are the ones, our parents, our grandparents, we're the ones who we serve. And so, without further ado, it is my honor to introduce the next governor of the state of California, John Chao.
Good afternoon, Director General, distinguished guests and friends. It's an extraordinary privilege and honor to be with all of you. I want to thank my longtime friend, Joe Chao. Joe and I have known each other, as I mentioned, for 2 decades. Joe was an extraordinary leader in the San Diego community amongst Taiwanese Americans, also the larger Asian American communities, and the bridges and partnerships they built with elected officials, other community leaders. And so, Joe, it's great to see you, and thank you for the invitation to be with all of you. And I'll speak about David in a moment. As mentioned, I come from an earlier generation. My parents were part of that first wave as they started to lift the discriminatory immigration practices against Asians and others. So my dad came from Taipei after graduating from Taida in the early 1950s. And it wasn't easy from that generation because we know that technology was different. We know that communication was different. We know America looked very different. America, 2 years prior to when I was born, and I was born in 1962, and so many of you are good with math, I'm 54 years old. America was 85% white. It was 11% African American. It was 3.5% Latino, and it was 0.6% Asian, right? Not Taiwanese American, Asian. Right? And I know those numbers don't add up to 100%, those are Pew numbers. And so my parents had to come across extraordinary differences. And my mom came separately, and she came from Tainan, and then she was educated in Japan, right, because we understand Japanese occupation. And then she came here, she cleaned floors to pay for her English lessons. And then they had 4 kids, and I am the oldest. My mom didn't get any of her dreams to come true. She wanted 4 surgeons. She got 1 ophthalmologist who performs eye surgery, 2 doctors, and 1 person who's in entertainment. But what we do, and why I'm really proud of having others like David, David talked about how challenging politics are. Oftentimes you are very blessed to have David nearby, or those of you who are from San Francisco. But David is a tenacious, courageous, intelligent, elected official, right? The politics of San Francisco are incredibly brutal, but today we know in this community that California has extraordinary struggles, especially for the next generation, for the middle class who don't have access to housing. And there is no other leader who's taken the same prominence that David has as to figuring out the huge housing challenges for the state of California. David understands the problems that Wall Street, that the credit ratings agencies, the business leaders, the technology and pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies that reside nearby are talking about not being able to harness and keep and grow that talent. And if we don't grow that talent, California won't be successful. I ask all of you to give a loud round of applause for David's extraordinary leadership on that front. And then David and I also want to signal something very different about the leadership of California. We see it, right? We heard Steve Harvey's comments just a few days ago. We saw the comments about people who are advisors to President Trump. We saw it during last year's Oscars, right? People continue to treat so many Asian Americans as second and third class citizens. Why David and I do this is because we're frankly sick and tired of Taiwanese Americans, other Asian Americans, women, Latinos, others who have to work twice as hard just to get to the same place. This is a beautiful vista site for me. When I grew up, we were the first Asian American family. I didn't say Taiwanese American. We were the first Asian American family in our community in suburban Chicago. And we faced a lot of bigotry. We faced a lot of discrimination. Right? I remember as a child or 6 or 7 and being isolated. People didn't want to play with us, right? People didn't want to talk to us. People treated us poorly. We had ugly racial epithets spray painted on our garage. Go home gook, go home Jap, go home chink, right? My dad, who's very well educated, my mom, who's such a decent person. My mom's Catholic, right? The other family's Buddhist and Taoist, right? She's the 4th of 5 daughters, so she wanted to be different, right? Right. So she went to Catholic school. But she prays for all of us, right? And so over a period of time, she was able to become friends with the people who discriminated against us. And I never thought we would get to this day in America where we're back to where I was as a young child. And so when you elect people like David or me or others, right, we're showing America that people, regardless of where we come from, regardless of what we look like, right, we can lead. And when we can lead, right, your kids and your grandkids and everything you have worked hard for and sacrificed to give them better opportunities will become those that become our reality. So I ask all of you to continue to do what you do today and always. Come together, work together, dream big, become more active, become leaders in your community, become more active in government, become more active in the private sector, change the communities that we live in. And then the voices of Taiwanese Americans, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations will become part of the American dream. And then part of this is, as David said, to change this thinking. I was really proud in one generation after being discriminated. The last election cycle, and California is bigger, Jerry Brown had the most amount of votes in California, which means he had the largest amount of votes in the United States of America. I had the next highest amount of votes. So I was the second largest vote getter in the United States of America. So in one generation, you can go from a mom who's on her floors, cleaning floors on her knees, a dad who comes to this country with 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, right, gets his PhD, and to have a child help lead the state. And that's what David and I and Joe and so many of others of you hope for. And so thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an extraordinary privilege. Let's continue to grow the community. Let's continue to make our hopes and aspirations one that we realize. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, John. So let's make sure let's send him to the highest officer for California. And like you say, when you know him as a person, you know he is your best friend. He's gonna fight for you. He's the most reliable people that I ever know. So the next we're gonna ask him to present 2 proclamations to tackle and tap NC. Unfortunately, I got this one this morning around 9 a.m., but they missed one, so we're gonna have to use the same one to present it twice. And ask the whole group to stay to take the group picture with this. So John, please. First for TAF NC, and we're gonna do it together? Okay, that's just one. Ask David to change the position. And They represent the same to both of us. Just for pictures purpose only.
Hello. Whoa. Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Ting, and I am one of the board members at the local Northern California chapter of FAPA. And so it's with me today. We have Faustine Lau, Jonathan Lee, and Philip Sun. And so we're very honored to have this opportunity to sit here with the future governor of California, so it's a great opportunity for us to ask some questions that we have come up with about the state of California, about the Taiwanese community, about Asian community, and about sort of the future of all that. So before we kick it off, I just want to say this is not a political talk show, although I guess we could make one if we could. So we would really just love to get a little bit of what Controller John, what you think about, what it is that we should all work together towards better California, better country for the future. So, Faustine, would you like to go for the first question?
Sure. So we'll start off easy. What is the -- issue you see in California, and how do you plan on addressing it?
The question is, what's the most pressing issue impacting California today? There's many pressing issues. One of the issues that I think we witnessed during this last presidential election, especially as you witnessed throughout the Midwest, was opportunity, and some people call it income inequality. I really view it as opportunity inequality. Here in California, we have approximately 20% of the people who can't cover the basic needs of their daily existence, right? And so when you're struggling to make sure that you can put food on the table, to pay for basic education costs, healthcare costs, right? You have a lot of people who are struggling, and we witness that extraordinary divide, and that has the economic implications, has a spillover effect in regards to social and cultural issues. There was a little bit of discussion about Asian Americans, but if you witness a lot of the newspapers, you had a lot of white or Caucasians who were very concerned about the growth of Latinos in their communities. And a lot of those precincts voted for Trump. We witnessed years ago when the Japanese were doing very well, and there was displacement, as we saw back then with the manufacturing and industrial jobs, and they took it out on the Asians, right? And today you're going to see the same thing, right? The policies against, right? They talk about China, but that has impacts on Taiwan, on Korea, and India. And so you have that discussion about how we, even though we were here decades ago before the discrimination, are viewed still as foreigners. And so we're not going to reach our highest promise. That's why I'm very concerned about all of you. I want America that views you and gives you the same opportunities that other Americans are afforded to. So that's how do we get America and California to a better place so they view us the same as everybody else.
Thanks.
So the next question I would like to ask is sort of along the same lines. So we just had a baby. She's about 9 months old. And what do you see is would be the #1 issue for California in about 20 years? Like something that people haven't really thought about today because we are working on some of the more pressing issues. But sort of looking forward, what would my daughter have to be dealing with when she's going to college, or when she's trying to get a job?
Yeah, so the answer is I don't know, right? 20 years from now, right? We barely know what's going to happen 10 years from now, more or less 20 years from now, right? When you think about the iPhone, that's a decade ago, right? Nobody viewed that all of us would be looking at these communication and technology devices and the prevalence that they are today. But what we're seeing today is that people are dislocated. And part of the issues that we face today is that the jobs of yesteryear, the middle class jobs, the manufacturing jobs, the trucking jobs, the construction industry, those jobs have been taken over through industrial robotics, like technology. So you go to those former $17 an hour jobs at the grocery store, right? They talk about how all the truck drivers, or most of the truck drivers, will be replaced by autonomous vehicles. And so what's going to happen to people and their ability to sustain themselves? And so and that will happen more rapidly. Some of you are in venture capital, you're in private equity, you're in technology, and we talk about how AI is going to replace a lot of these types of jobs. And so that's part of the challenges that we face. But like so many of us in our values, the only way to be competitive, and it's no guarantee that you will get a job, is that if you don't have high value education, if you don't have tailored skill set, you're not going to have a fighting chance, or your opportunities are going to decrease dramatically. In the United States of America, today we have about 32 to 33% of the workers that are college educated. To have that same level and to maintain the same quality of life, we need those numbers to be about 60% for later generations of Americans. And we're not educating enough Americans to get to those levels of education that they can be successful.
Thank you for that. Related to your first point about opportunity inequality, affordable housing has been cited as one of the major issues for California. What do you think are the repercussions for not having more or adequate affordable housing, and how do you hope to address it?
Yeah, so we're in a massive housing crisis. So if you look at the average teacher salary in the state of California, anybody want to guess what the average teacher salary in California is?
$40,000.
It's actually $73,000. $73,000. So what percent of teachers with the median salary, $73,000, what percentage of the houses can they buy in the state of California? Anybody want to guess? What percentage? 80. 80? Yeah, whoever said 20, you're close. If you have a salary of $73,000, you can afford 17% of the houses in the state of California. Right? To get a sense, prior to the recession, the median price, right, and we remember our math lessons, right? Median is middle. It's not average, it's median, middle. The median price of a house in California was what? Anybody keep guessing? 600,000. 600,000, right? Now that's really cheap for all of you up here, right? I came from Fresno last night, right? So it's very different. The median price, 600,000 pre-recession. Then during the recession, real estate prices dropped 60%. So between 270 to 290,000, right? A lot of people, for Americans, 70% of Americans, their number one asset is their house, right? So if your number one asset drops by 60%, right, a lot of people lose a lot of their money. During the last recession in America, we lost $12 trillion of people's wealth. Now, we recovered it, right? But the top 20% got most of it, and if you're at the bottom, right, you're still trying to climb out of it. So here in California, our middle class is stuck, right? Because if you're the normal person, education costs, and welcome to Kansan and Daisy Chu, Kansan's extraordinary, the assembly member down from the San Jose area, and Daisy's his is his better half. Sorry, Kansan, I don't want to put it that way, but so 270 to 290,000, and then it came back up. In California, the middle class is stuck, right? And part of why the reason the middle class each year about a percentage is dropping is because that our wages are not increasing as fast as the cost of our living. So healthcare costs is growing faster than the money we're making. Education costs is growing faster than what we're making, right? Transportation expenditures are growing faster. In the old days, one family could live on one income. Today, you need at least two, and a lot of families can't make it on two incomes. And so, if the middle class is stuck, right, that housing isn't turning over, so that their kids can't buy their parents' house. And the price has grown dramatically. So, when I graduated from law school and I moved to California, I had student loan debt. I bought a used car, I had used car debt, and then I bought a house and I had mortgage debt, right? And my parents co-signed. My starter house in Los Angeles was $155,000. Today it's my mom's retirement home, right? My mom has that house. That house is worth over $500,000, right? So that means the starter house for $155,000 in 1988 is now a $500,000 plus house. If you have a $500,000 plus house, you need 20% down, $100,000. Think how long it takes to save $100,000, and you need an income of about $100,000. That's why we have so many young people who can't stay in California, right? They're leaving California because we don't have that housing. That's why David Chu's work in regards to tax credits is so very important. And I chair two of the state's 4 housing authorities. In my first year in office as treasurer 2 years ago, I tried to rewrite the rules on affordable housing. My predecessor, Bill Lockyer, financed 14,000 housing units in his last year as treasurer. I tried to rewrite the rules so we can afford more affordable housing. And so last year, my second year of office, we financed 25,000 units, right? I am trying to grow how many housing units we can afford so that young people who graduate from college or the disabled or single mom with kids have a chance to try to build their lives here in California. So that's what I'm working on in the executive branch of government, and David's doing a great job in the legislative branch of government.
Thank you very much for that. Now going to give you another step forward, and you can tell there's slight progression in the questions going on. So, well, talking about Obamacare now. About half of the 11 million individuals that are enrolled currently do live in California. And of course, the last 24 hours with our first executive order being signed, things might change a little bit. So can you speak a little bit about that moving forward for these individuals?
Yeah, so how many of you are in healthcare? Raise your hand. So maybe 5% of you are in healthcare. So the loss of Obamacare is going to have a huge impact on the economy of the state of California. The expected, if they do a full repeal of Obamacare, we expect to lose about 209,000 jobs in the state of California. Okay, so during the last recession, the state of California lost 1.34 million jobs. We lost 1.34 million jobs. So, give you a context, losing 209,000 jobs would obviously decrease the opportunity for California's economy to grow, right? Because you want to be growing jobs, right? What are those 209,000 people going to do if they lose their job to Obamacare? In the state of California, what percentage of kids have access to health care? Anybody want to guess? Thank you for always guessing. I appreciate it. Right. 40%? Anybody want to guess? Somebody said 60? 97%. 97% because of Obamacare, right? We used to have less than half of that before Obamacare. Obamacare has really picked up the percentage. One of the fastest growing expenditures that impacts our budget, right, Hanson has to deal with it, is healthcare costs, right? Because we're all getting older. We're all getting older. And so even though on Medi-Cal, 60% of the people on Medi-Cal are kids. Over 60% of the expenditures are older people. Right? As we get older, we have diabetes, we have coronary disease, we have hypertension, right? And we have other related issues. And so it becomes much more expensive as you become older. You're younger, you're healthier, you're fit, it's low cost. And so Obamacare also will put more people at risk, right? What Obamacare also said is, and my dad had health issues, right? And it would impact our family finances. My dad had 2 quadruple bypasses and he had 2 strokes. The old insurance plan used to be 80-20. Even if you have a $100,000 procedure, right, and your insurance covers 80%, and we know they don't cover 80%, they fight about everything. And you got to cover 20%. 20% back in the 1970s and 80s is a lot of money, right? Oftentimes that would be your full year take-home pay. And before Obamacare, we had all these American families that would file for bankruptcy because healthcare costs were too expensive. So Obamacare, and the insurance companies used to put a cap, right? They say over your lifetime, you can have $250,000 that will cover, or will cover $500,000, or will cover $750,000, right? So when you're older and you're on your deathbed, right, and you have some emergency procedure, right, that would run your costs. So a lot of people were left without insurance, and it would bankrupt families. So Obamacare lifted that cap so that we would have less families in trouble. Then a lot of us have kids that have health issues. And so Obamacare said, right, if you have a child up to the age of 26 that doesn't have health insurance, they can be covered by their parents, right? That protected a lot of kids. And then for a lot of us, right, some of us may have pre-existing health issues, right? You may be a child and you may have, you know, a coronary related issue. And because you have a coronary related issue, right, once you left your parents, you graduated from college, you go to work and your work doesn't have health insurance, the insurance companies didn't want to cover you. So Obamacare said you cannot deny insurance to somebody just because they have a pre-existing issue. So it really relieved the pressure and hurt and the financial considerations of a lot of people. So this will have a major impact. And some of you might have seen that the Congressional Budget Office, right, the math arm for the United States House of Representatives, talked about the huge negative impact with the repeal of Obamacare. So it's going to have huge implications and consequences to people's healthcare outcomes, access to healthcare, and economics, right? And I'm not saying Obamacare is perfect, right? There's a lot of things that need to be done, but you shouldn't pull back people's health insurance, right? America is the only nation, major nation in this world that doesn't provide the same universal access to healthcare that all the other industrial powers are. And frankly, a lot of people are looking to Taiwan today, you know, and their healthcare system.
So next question is, so we're kind of hearing about all of these sort of upcoming challenges that we're going to be facing. Do you have any good news as to what drives California's economy? What are some of the areas in the economy that's expected to grow, or that the government is expected to you know, provide some sort of assistance to?
So California's economy, who knows how large our economy is? Where do we rank in the world? 6, right, good. So we're the 6th largest economy: United States, China, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, California. So our economy is about 2.46 trillion. Before the recession, we were a $2 trillion economy. During the recession, we fell to a $1.9 trillion economy. We were the world's 8th largest economy. Then we went to the world's 12th largest economy. And then for those of you who still study economics, you understand business cycles, right? The countries that depended heavily on minerals, especially oil or natural gas, Russia, Venezuela, other places, right? As the price drops, right, their economy drops too. And so those countries, economies, Brazil, Russia, they dropped as the price of oil drops, right? And then the United States kept growing. So we are a very diverse economy. You are in the highest performing economic region in the United States of America. So the San Jose, Menlo Park, Santa Clara is #1, right? And it's heavily technology based, right? And we know the diversity of technology, right? So it's not, you're right, it's just not the hardware and the software. You got pharmaceuticals, you've got biotechnology, even some petroleum engineers consider this technology, even though you don't have that up here. San Francisco is #4, and because of the growth of this area, it's spread widespread. So San Luis Obispo, which used to have a heavy focus on agriculture, has become more technology driven, right? Their partnerships with Google and Facebook, they have become a top 25. Santa Rosa has become a top 25. Oakland, because San Francisco got so expensive and they don't have enough affordable housing, right? The people from San Francisco moved to Oakland, to Emeryville, to Stockton, right? So those condos that used to be $200,000 in Oakland are today $700,000, right? Because of the spillover. And so those economies have grown. So this last year, we've seen a growth in professional, technology, administrative areas. Healthcare continues to grow, but as I pointed out, if we have a repeal of Obamacare, we will have healthcare pull back. We have had, because the economy is performing well, more construction jobs, which is healthy because you have more middle class. Part of this is who benefits from that, right? So some people like high-speed rail, some people don't like high-speed rail. But high-speed rail is really developing jobs in some of the low-income communities in California. So yesterday I was in Fresno. Right? High-speed rail is a $6 billion investment in the San Joaquin Valley. So it's hundreds of jobs in Fresno, right? It's a lot of middle-class jobs, right? So it has those types of impacts. And so we have this incredibly diverse economy throughout the state. The growth areas will continue to be technology and then healthcare, depending on what happens with Obamacare. Where we're not growing, the two areas that we're not growing is minerals. So for instance, oil is not growing in California and those other types of jobs. And manufacturing, even though California is the largest manufacturer, it's just not California. The whole world, manufacturing jobs are dropping because they're being replaced by technology.
Thank you for that. Very, very insightful. I know this is probably more related, very near and dear to the folks here. I think folks want to know, how do you see the relationship between California and Taiwan? And if you were a governor, how would that evolve in terms of economic, trade, cooperation, and innovation?
Yeah, so the relationship between the United States, and specific California and Taiwan, will continue to grow. It has to. If we're smart, if we're Californians, we appreciate our diversity, right? And if we're smart about our economics, we use our geographic advantage, we use our diversity, our cultural advantage, right? People want to come to California because they have family members and friends who are here, right? Wouldn't you rather pick Palo Alto, well, if you could afford it, right? Or Milpitas, or San Jose, or Monterey Park, or Arcadia, or San Marino, right? Some of the most successful communities where you have friends, where you have people who understand you, where you already have the language schools or cultural centers. versus moving elsewhere. And I'm not picking on other places, right? As I pointed out, if we grew up in suburban Chicago, the first Asian, first Taiwanese family, and it wasn't easy, right? So who wants all that hardship? Part of the reason I moved to California is that I wanted people who were more open-minded, right? And when you have people who come from different backgrounds, right? When you have people who can make the food that you grew up eating, right? You rather pick a place where you think you have better opportunities. And then economically, right? Taiwan's our 5th largest export partner. And so I go back every once in a while. I should go back more frequently. But we have a lot of shared interests in commerce and industry that we need to take and hopefully grow so that both people on both sides of the ocean will benefit from.
Thank you very much for that. Another question now. Today's actually a very interesting, very unique day. Across the nation today, actually, we have dozens of people marching today in a very unified, very powerful. San Francisco, and across California, many cities have self-proclaimed to be sanctuary cities, wanting to protect these people, the minorities. But of course, our president has also voiced his opinion on basically wanting to cut off funding for these plans. Please speak a little bit about this and your thoughts.
Yeah, so clearly we need massive reform of our immigration system in the United States of America. The federal government has been unwilling to lead on so many of the issues, so it's not only the undocumented, but it's like H-1B visas, it's certain other types of incentive performances, how do you bring foreign direct investment into the state, and so, we have a misallocation between what needs to be done at the federal and state level. And so, frankly, in regards to sanctuary cities, a lot have chosen, and I support a lot of those policies, not to use local resources on enforcing the immigration restrictions. However, that's not to say that we shouldn't be supporting, at all levels of government, taking on those who who engage in criminal activity, right? We don't want people who cross the border, who come into this country, who are, creating heinous crimes against people, right? So we need better coordination between the feds and locals as to, feds' responsibilities in regards to immigration, but everybody partnering to make sure that we capture the most violent criminals in our system and make sure that justice is adhered to.
Okay, I'm going to deviate a little bit from that list. Deviate all you want. So,
Kanson's here, so Kanson's available.
So everyone here is here to support you, and we're very thankful that you are here with us. Do you have any advice for the younger generation? How can we do to help?
So, what I'm sure was really difficult for Kanson and Daisy and me, when you're the first generation, you have to do everything, right? You have to figure it out. You make so many mistakes. People aren't there to help you, right? It's so inefficient. So if you don't, and we know it's hard, right? Because you'll have the cultural difference. I used to argue with my mom all the time, right? My mom used to, this was my life until 8th grade. My life up until 8th grade was go to school, come home, play the piano for 1 hour. My mom would make great food, right? And she's a great cook, right? So she'd make 4 to 8 dishes, right? Watch Walter Cronkite, right? And this is obviously the older generation, right? That understand who Walter Cronkite is, right? Before before all the others. Walter Cronkite before Dan Rather. One of the biggest investments my parents made for their kids was how big our office desk was, right? Because we'd study behind a desk, and then I'd study 5 hours a night. And then on Sundays we go to church and we go to Chinese school. And so we didn't really take Chinese school that seriously because when there's not many Chinese or Taiwanese in your community, right, you're not speaking to a lot of people. It's like, why are we doing this? There's nobody else to talk to. But we studied 5 hours a night. And so, right, my mom was always about straight A's and piano. So 7th grade, I got 2 ribbons. perfect attendance, and straight A's. We go to the honors ceremony, and my mom says, that kid has 6 ribbons, how come you got 2 ribbons? Now you guys understand, right? And this is where I saw my chance for freedom, right? I said, Mom, student government, basketball, track, drama, arts, right, something. She goes, you do what you need to do, go get a ribbon. Right, and back when I was growing up, there was a lot of cultural conflict, as you saw back then. Right, so it had, you know, back then, right, because I said the world was different, they used to have these battles, you know, the civil rights battles. Are white people or black people smarter? Right, they used to say, you know, the African Americans aren't as smart. Right, and then they had some report that was published in the Wall Street Journal, right, and they said, you know, the Asian kids perform really well, even though there wasn't more, right? But they said genetically, there's not a big difference. You know, why do the Asian kids perform better? They study longer, right? They said, back then they said the average Asian kid studied 4 hours a night. Right, that's when I was really arguing with my mom. He said, even you, Mom, I said, we study 5 hours a night. You overdo the other Asian parents. Right, they 5 hours a night. But part of this is, as I was growing up, there was nobody to help, right? You get into politics, where are the other Asians to try to make the introductions, right? Politics is about the exercise of power. You want to know why the Taiwanese Americans in America aren't as powerful? Because if you don't stand up and you don't say anything, right? My mom was good at school, right? Because my mom would come to school, so all the teachers knew her, right? I get a 93 on a test, right? It'd be embarrassing. My mom would come into the school and say, my son's flunking, right? And the teacher said, your son got the highest grade in the class, right? Mrs. Junker goes, he missed by 7 points. He's not going to be able to go to college, right? This is 6th grade. Right, well, part of that is, you know, how do you get involved? And so people won't treat you as second-class citizens or aren't as likely if they know you, right? If they do something wrong, you'll say, hey, you're wrong, right? And you can build those friendships. So for the next generation, right, take advantage not only of people in the Taiwanese American community, but build the friendships, the relationships that make you successful, right? Stanford says, right, the people in your circle impact how much information you have, right? The better information you have, the better decisions you will make, right? So instead of you having to figure everything out and it be really slow, I'll give you an example, another Taiwanese American, Goodwin Liu, right? Goodwin Liu got nominated to be on the United States Circuit Court of Appeals, right? And part of it is partisan politics, but part of it is also ethnic politics, right? So if Goodwin or somebody else came from a really powerful community who backed them up, right? If you had all these Taiwanese Americans or Asian Americans or others say to the Republicans, you know, you go against Goodwin, we're not going to support you for your future elections, right? Because there's a lot of Taiwanese who support a lot of powerful Republicans. You say, we want you to support him against you being quiet or you standing up against him, right? It will change, right? Because don't think about just Goodwin, think about that being your kid, right? Your kid works hard his whole life. He can be one of the most powerful, prominent judges, right? And why you become a lawyer or a politician or a judge is you make the rules of law of this country, right? And we all have to follow those rules. That's why so many other communities want elected officials, because we want to make these rules more fair to us, to help us with our dreams. So that's why you do this. So you in life, put the best people in your life so you can be the most successful.
Well, thank you for that recount. I think a lot of the younger generation, that story resonates with a lot of us, especially about the ribbons and the awards and not being able to get into college in 6th grade by only getting a 93. Beat me, I only got like a 90 and I got that same speech too. So one of the questions I think for a lot of us, and particularly me, that we're interested in is, since the recession, the California economy has rebounded a ton, right? And as such, the revenue for the government has also rebounded. There have been reports that spending has also grown just as quickly and will possibly outgrow the budget again next year. So A, is that true? B, if so, as governor, how would you address this? Where do you think we could either should we balance the budget? Should we cut spending? Or if not, should we actually increase spending? And if so, on what?
So yes, the California economy. So some of you remember I got into a huge battle with Governor Schwarzenegger. Right? Joe mentioned it in his comments. So those of us who have a math background, those of us who has a finance background, and even if it's not your major, everybody should take a finance class, right? Because all of us have to deal with our own money. So everybody should take a finance class, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a medical doctor or any other profession. So when I became your controller, my previous position, which is the state's chief fiscal officer, right? You paid your taxes to me. I chaired the franchise tax board. I was a member of the board of equalization. And then if you got a tax refund check, it had my signature on it, right? I paid the state's bills, right? So I did 43 million disbursements a year. Part of that is that I have to make sure that there's enough money to pay the bills. Because if you're the controller, if you write a bounced check, it's a felony. And as an aside, how many of you have checked unclaimed property? Anybody? Does everybody know what unclaimed property is? Okay. That means no, right? Here, let me take a moment, not to answer the question, but something you should do. Pull out your smartphone, okay? Go to www.claimit.ca.gov. Gets you to the controller's website, which is now Betty Yee. She took over after me. Where it says at the bottom of the page, thank you, Kenson. Where it says at the bottom of the page, start your search, click on it. Then it says last name, put in your last name. Then it says first name, put in your first name. And then hit search. And if it pulls up your name, see if it's you to see if the state of California owes you money, okay? What happens with that rule is, after 3 years, if a business owes you money and they can't find you, let's say it's your bank, your insurance company, or if you're a business owner, right? Let's say you own Canson Chu Enterprises, right? And then Joe owes you Enterprises, Canson money, but he can't find Canson, right? I had an example, actually one of them, right? I got criticized by the newspaper. They said, hey John, how come you can't find Steve Jobs, right? So Apple owed Steve Jobs money, right? And they sent it to me, right? And they say, John, how come you can't find Steve Jobs, right? I said, how come Apple can't find Steve Jobs? He's the CEO of the company, right? So after you checked, if you owe that money and it's less than $10,000, you can submit it electronically to ask for your money back. So in my first year in office, when I was the controller, the program was broken, right? I took it over from the previous controller. I got hauled into court. It was broken. I asked the judge, give me 1 year to fix it. I fixed it. And over the next 7 years, I returned $3.1 billion of your money to you, right? So you should always check twice a year to see if the state of California owes you money. Now, back to that in regards to expenses. So I challenged Governor Schwarzenegger. Now, some of you might have seen, because early on as controller, I started posting the state's financial report, right? What you should do, right? How much money did we collect this month? How much money did we spend this month? How much money do we actually have? So even though the economy was doing well in 2007, right, the recession started at the end of 2007. The real estate crisis started later in 2007. I said on July 13, 2007, California just went red, meaning We're putting out more money than we're bringing in. And you know, if you do that over the long term, you're going to have financial trouble, right? Because you can't keep spending more than you're bringing in. It's a bad practice, right? For individuals, for businesses, for churches, for nonprofit organizations. 2008, we got into financial crisis. Governor Schwarzenegger signed a budget for over $103 billion. The day the governor signed the budget, I said the governor's budget was out of balance. So Governor Schwarzenegger was mad at me, right? Governor Schwarzenegger, like in meetings, said, John, you're always such a Debbie Downer, right? For those of you who don't know what Debbie Downer is, like, you're such a pessimist, right? He said, Governor, I'm not a Debbie Downer, right? It's just the math, right? The economy is weakening, right? The week before the governor signed the budget was the global financial crisis, right? Lehman Brothers blew up and went bankrupt. Bank of America acquired Merrill Lynch. The stock market was down hundreds of points, right? So people were losing their wealth. So I mentioned I started posting the information monthly. A week and a half later, after the governor signs the budget, I say, Governor, we're $1.5 billion short. That year we missed by over $15 billion, right? That's why we had the state financial issues. Then some of you might have been mad because there were a lot of Californians who were mad at me because I held back your tax refunds in February of 2009. Right? If you filed your taxes, right, and you wanted a tax refund, I told the state I can't give you your money back. Right? I have to hold it. Why? I don't have any money. Right? How do you pay a bill if you have no money? Right? So we had about $6 billion to pay $10 billion worth of bills. As the state controller, I have to make sure the number one payment is education. That's, under law, that's the top priority payment. Number two is debt service. But what you're really trying to protect is debt service, right? Because you don't want to default on bonds, right? That's like saying, I'm not going to pay more mortgage, right? You don't want to be on the streets. So I didn't want California to be like, you can't use this term because it's a legal term, but if I didn't pay debt service, it's like bankruptcy. And I didn't want California to be what happened to Greece. Some of you know what's happening in Puerto Rico, right? They did technical defaults. I kept California out of technical default. So yes, you have to have a balanced budget. Now, our revenues continue to grow, but they're growing more slowly. They're growing slower. And you're saying, how come we're spending more money? Well, we're spending more money because we keep getting sick. That's part of the issue, right? We provide Medi-Cal, so if somebody needs Medi-Cal treatment, they're covered. And when the economy slows down, oftentimes the use of the social safety net increases, right? If you have a job, you don't need to use you don't need government's help as much. But if you lost a job, right, and government's collecting less money, and people are using government, the costs increase. So we have to be smarter about how we use money. So, yes to all of those things. We need to save more. That's what we're trying to do in California. Kansas is doing a great job, right? Pushing a budget that invests in education, invests in healthcare, invests in jobs, but also keeps money for a rainy day fund when the economy gets worse.
Thank you very much. Wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit now. Talking about the data disaggregation bill, AB 1726. Have you guys all heard of the bill, AB 1726? Peachy Ardale. In short, basically, it allows minorities, ethnic minorities, including Taiwanese, to get better state funding, primarily in healthcare and education. The bill was passed, was signed, but as far as I know, it was quite heavily handicapped, actually. So please speak a little bit about the bill going forward, and more importantly, basically, how can Taiwanese and other ethnic minorities find more fair representation?
So one of the really controversial issues is the disaggregation of data. right? A lot of the Asians are very concerned that the use of data will be used to discriminate against Asian Americans, especially in regards to education. I have been a longtime proponent of trying to get as much information as possible about everybody. I'll give you an example. One of my godchildren, I'm Catholic, so I have 6 I'm blessed, I have 6 godchildren. One of my friends, Peter Wong, used to work in President Clinton's White House for the Council of Economic Advisors. And so, you know, one of the powers of government is how do you spend money? And as they had this meeting, Peter was going, hey, how come we're not using these federal dollars for, especially the Asian American community, right? They're doing it for whites, they're doing it for Latinos, they're doing it for women, they're doing it for African Americans, but they're not using these monies for Asians, right? Because, you know, we have different incidences of healthcare outcomes. And so he said, his colleague said, hey, go out into the community and get needs assessments. You know, what do we see in the Asian community? Right? It shouldn't be just the Asian community because Japanese, Korean, you know, Taiwanese, Bangladeshis, those from Pacific Islanders, we're not all the same health outcomes, right? We have different hepatitis outcomes, right? We have different cancer outcomes than others. And what happened is Peter went and surveyed a lot of the Asian community health groups, and they didn't do the research. Why? They didn't have the money. It's a chicken and the egg problem. So it's important that we get this data so we say, oh, you have this outbreak in the Taiwanese community, or you have this outbreak in the Japanese community, or you have this outbreak in the Guatemalan community, or you have this outbreak in the Nigerian community, that we can get the information so that we can try to help finance that type of activity, right? And so that's part of where you have like the Asian caucus or Latino caucuses or others. We need to work together to try to promote that so we get access to the resources so that we can take care of ourselves.
Control John, I was wondering, Cheng, I was wondering if you don't mind taking maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience. I was wondering if you don't mind just calling on anybody raising their hands. So right now we're going to open, we don't have that much time left, so maybe 2 to 3 questions. Please make your questions short and in the form of a question. Yes, make it in the form of a question. And I'm going to turn it over to Controller John Cheng.
Okay, so when I call on you, you have to tell me your name and you also have to tell me your dream. So, okay. So, do you have a question? So tell me your name and your dream and then ask your question.
My name is Charlie Chu. My dream is U.S. recognizing Taiwan as I just have 2 questions. After November elections, there are so many in California want to push California should be an independent country. Question number 1, there are those in California who think California is too big. We should split into 6 states. What do you think about that?
So, no. No. I love California as it is. It's right. It's far from perfect. I don't even know how you break California into 6 states. I mean, we would waste so much time and energy to figure out, first of all, water rights, right? So if you're going to talk about, so this area, the Silicon Valley, right? They talk about how rich it is. This Silicon Valley, if you broke it up as a state, would be dead poor. Why? Because Silicon Valley depends on the Delta and Northern California for water. Right? The Silicon Valley's economy could tank. If you know water rights, our area where we get water, a lot of water for the state, we have to protect that area. The National Geologic Service says it has a 66% of being impacted in the next 30 years by some earthquake movement. So if you can imagine Southern California, if you imagine the Silicon Valley being disconnected from the
places where we get water, it wouldn't work.
Do we have any questions? Any questions? There's one over there.
With your signature, because I work for the state at San Jose University, and I had the honor of listening to you as a keynote speaker at our Water Development Summit. So that was very impressive. So my question to you is because as first generation Taiwanese here, I consider you here very successful because I had a tenure faculty at San Jose State. And so my question is, because there's always struggle funding for public education, and I want to see if my grandchildren will have the same opportunity as the first generation. They will become successful as well.
So education funding is under constant struggle. Here's California's budget. So think of every tax dollar that you pay that goes into the general fund. About 51 to 50, so for every dollar that you pay, 51 to 53 cents goes into education, right? So K through higher education. So K through 14 takes about 41 cents to 43 cents, depending on a given year. And then higher education takes about another dime. Now, that dime that we put into higher education is not enough to pay for the University of California system and the Cal State University system. So at the beginning of the last recession, about 21 to 23% of the University of California's budget was paid through general funds. During the recession, the contribution for the University of California from the state general fund dropped to about 10.3 cents, right? That's why you keep seeing this increase in tuition for the University of California and for the Cal State system. Now, what's happening? Part of it is healthcare, right? Healthcare is taking larger components of the state budget, right? And will continue to put more pressure. That's frankly why Obamacare is important, right? If you take away Obamacare, Kansan has more pressure to try to figure out how to take care of the sick people in the state of California, in this state. Obamacare, right, up to a 100%, the state covers from 100 to 138%. For the first 3 years, the new enrollees, Obamacare covered 100%, and then it was a sliding scale down. This year, they would have covered 95%. The state of California pays 5%. That 5% equals a little bit more than $600 million, right? That's a lot of money. But instead, right, if we wouldn't cover 100% of it because the state law in place is if Obamacare for that 100 to 138% category drops below 70%, the state of California no longer participates. But let's say we covered 30% of it, right? And then you're talking about still billions of dollars, which we don't have in the state budget. But even if we picked up a little bit of it, right, that means less money available for education. So what I try to do, right, it's always a challenge, is how do we spend more money wisely? It's sort of like my mom and dad. When I was your auditor as state controller, I was the most successful auditor in California history. Right? Kathleen Connell, who was followed by Steve Wesley as controller, and then I followed Steve Wesley as controller. Kathleen Connell was the most successful auditor before me. Right? So in 8 years, Kathleen Connell did $2.5 billion of audits. When I became the controller, in 8 years, I did over $9.3 billion worth of audits, right? I wanted to make sure you pay your hard-earned taxpayer dollars. You want Kansan and I to use it wisely. And so we spend money. Sometimes we're imperfect, right? But I go back and audit to make sure that we spend it better, right? As your state treasurer today, and for those of you who don't know what the state treasurer does, I'm your banker, right? So think of personal banker, think of investment banker, think of commercial banker. On a daily basis, I invest your state's money. So between $70, $75 billion I invest for all of us, right? I sell our bonds, right? I try to get the best debt, gets the best ratios, right? I try to renegotiate our credit rating. It's like your FICO score, right? So in 2 years as your state treasurer, in getting a higher credit rating,
and being able to refinance our debt, I have saved us $4.8 billion, right? So it's finding $4.8 billion that we can use for education and other things, right? So it's going to be hard, but we're going to, and then the voters chose, right? You did a good job, right? This was hard. Many of you didn't like it, but you voted to increase taxes, right? By voting to increase taxes, we brought more money for education, right? And if you remember 2012, the state had financial difficulties. Part of the case that we argued why we wanted to increase taxes, in California, back then there were about 6.25 million kids in K through 12. 188 school districts educating 3 million of those kids were in financial trouble. After we passed the tax increase, the number of school districts that were in financial trouble dropped from 188 to 20. Right, so we were able to help finance the schools so that they're in better position. So we're trying, but it's never easy and it's not perfect.